So welcome to another Mathematic webinar. My name is Nicole Owens. I'm the Director of Marketing Communications for the organization. If you're not familiar with us, we are a membership-based trade association for the medical device industry, and we work to bolster the industry through education and networking, connection, and advocacy. Today, we're going to be talking about ensuring medical device safety and effectiveness with electromagnetic simulation. And we have our friends today with us from Dassault Systèmes. Before I turn it over to our moderator today, I do have a few housekeeping notes. So this webinar is being recorded. So anyone who registered for the webinar will receive a copy of the recording. We're also going to have time for Q&A. So anytime you have a question, please make sure you put it in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer all of the questions in the time we have allotted. All right, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator for today. Carl D'Souza is the process director for Dassault Systèmes, and he's going to lead our conversation. Carl.
Great. Thank you very much, Nicole, for that introduction. And once again, welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar today. We're going to be talking about electromagnetics. And if you give me 1 second, I will start sharing. Okay. Great. So today we're going to be talking about electromagnetic simulation in the context of medical devices, looking at how we can use electromagnetics, or what we're going to call EMAG, to improve medical device safety, performance, and effectiveness. And the way we're going to do so in the next hour is I'm going to start off with a brief introduction, a little bit introducing our company, Dassault Systèmes, and kind of setting the stage for why we might want to use simulation and electromagnetic simulation in particular for medical devices. And then I'll turn it over to my colleagues who will step us through what SIMULIA offers in the context of electromagnetic simulation, a brief overview, which will then take us into a couple of applications that will be kind of the meat of what we're going to discuss today. First, we'll talk about connected devices, and then we'll talk about medical implant safety. And finally, I'll come back in to kind of summarize what we've heard and give you a brief conclusion. So without much further ado, let's jump into the topic of the introduction itself. So firstly, for some of you who don't know who we are Dassault Systèmes, and our mission or our central belief is that virtual worlds can extend and improve the real world. And what that means basically is that in the real world, we always run out of time for the most part when we're trying to develop products or services or some kind of offer that we'd like to present. And this means that we often do not get it perfect. Sometimes we don't even get it correct. Go back and learn from our mistakes and improve the next time. Whereas if we are working in the virtual world, we are free to come up with as many ideas as we like. We can try out various alternatives, from what a product might look like, to how it might operate, to how our customers might receive it and actually use it, all the way to marketing and so on. So it really gives us a upfront way to assess how our products and ideas might translate into the real world. And by doing so, it allows us, of course, to improve them, the products, the experiences that our customers have, and so on. The way we do that at Dassault Systèmes is we are internally organized by what we call brands, where each of our brands represents a different technology or a specialized solution that is part of the continuum of a product development process. For instance, there are 4 kind of sectors that we organize ourselves by. You'll see here in the central image of the 3D Experience platform, which is our central social collaborative innovation platform that we use in order to develop our solutions and facilitate collaboration between stakeholders across different functions in an enterprise. Today, we'll focus mainly on our simulation applications, of which you see SIMULIA at the bottom. But I'm sure a lot of you would be familiar with, for example, CAD offerings like SolidWorks, CATIA, and so on. Now, the other thing that we do is that we take an industry-centric approach to the solutions that we develop. What that means is rather than producing only general-purpose solutions that you would have to adapt to your needs, We try to take into consideration your needs, your specific applications, your specific ways of working, and make sure that our solutions can deliver value to you for those specific applications. You can see here there's 12 primary industries that we service today. And today, again, of course, we'll be focusing on life sciences and healthcare, in particular, medical devices and equipment. Okay, so now down to the brand level, Simulia, who are we, what we do? So basically, we are a technology-driven brand. And what you're going to see today is how we develop multi-scale, multi-physics, multidisciplinary solutions across various different physics domains like structures, fluids, and of course, electromagnetics that we're going to be talking about today. Focusing very strongly on the functions and features that the software provides, but also performance and of course, usability. Who do we serve? So we serve multiple different audiences, spanning all the way from traditional simulation experts, which might be like some of you on this call today, but also designers, SolidWorks or other CAD designers, engineers within CAD systems, design systems like CATIA, and also some of our newer users who are already on this 3D experience platform that I just mentioned in the previous slide. We strongly believe in a unification or a unified approach to modeling and simulation, and that's what we provide on the 3D experience platform. And again, we'll show you a brief demo of kind of how that works today in the context of eMag. Really, what this allows us to do is provide solutions along with the other brands that you saw in a unified environment, sharing a common data model. And being on the platform allows for collaboration, and it also allows for us to develop, as I mentioned before, industry-specific applications that might span multiple different technologies, but are at the heart performance-driven. So they're not simulation for the sake of simulation, but they're simulation in order to achieve a measurable business objective. And of course, being on the platform, we get full traceability all the way from requirements right to the end of the life cycle of the product. And all of this is possible by virtue of being connected to this centralized enterprise innovation platform. Okay, so here's a nice collage, I think, just showing you kind of what this looks like in the context of simulation, spanning these different industries. So on the horizontal axis on the top, you can see industries all the way from transportation, aerospace, so on and so forth. And on the vertical axis, you can see some of these different physics in action. For example, use of structures for different applications spanning these industries, fluids, electromagnetics, and so on. It's a lot to take in, so don't worry. I meant this just as a brief collage to what we kind of do. Our purpose today, or our focus, is going to be on this kind of intersection between the life sciences industry and the electromagnetic simulation domain. Myself, I represent the life sciences industry at Simulia, and my colleagues on the call, Nivedita and Abhishek, are our electromagnetics experts. So really, we have who you need for this webinar today. Okay, so now let's jump back with that introduction to why we're all here today, right? And so the main reason is that today medical device manufacturers, as I'm sure you know, are kind of under pressure to reduce product development time and cost. These product development times could range anywhere from months to years, and the cost could range all the way to the millions of dollars, right? So there's a constant competitive market pressure to bring down these costs. Now, what underlines these? There's many different reasons we could look at, but what I wanted to kind of refresh you or remind you of today is, firstly, of course, there's a constant need to improve medical performance and safety, and this is the thrust of what people use product development tools for. At the same time, while you're doing these, while you're trying to meet these objectives, you have to make sure that you're complying with the different regulations that exist globally for different applications across structures, fluids, CMAG, and so on. And that you're trying to do that while balancing time to market, right? So you're trying to meet these regulations, but you don't want it to take excessively long. You want to be able to accelerate your time to market and get your product out there, as soon as possible. At the same time, you're also trying to make sure that these products, when they do get out there, in addition to functioning as expected and being safe, they also need to provide a reasonably good experience to the user. And in this case, the user could be a patient or it could be a clinician, right? And if these are hard to use products, or cause discomfort to patients, they might not be adopted as much as desired. And that again could lead to the product not performing as expected. Now, sometimes to enhance these experiences, there's a lot of customization or personalization that takes place in order to make the product more user-friendly. And that in turn adds complexity to the devices, right? So a lot of devices are now becoming smart devices where they have sensors and other kind of components on them which are meant to improve the patient experience. But overall, this makes it much, much more complex as a product because now you're not only handling the mechanics of it, you have to worry about the control systems, the electronics, so on and so forth, right? And good examples of that are smart devices, which we look at today, and things like active implantable medical devices, which we'll also look at briefly today. So just handling this complexity becomes very, very challenging. And finally, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that when the product does get released, there is a low or no risk of adverse event and product recalls, which could be quite damaging to your company. So here's where simulation can help you, we believe strongly, helping you improve or address all of these challenges while at the same time reducing your dependence on physical testing, which you might otherwise have to use in order to verify whether your product meets the needs it's supposed to. So I wanted to show you just briefly kinds of applications where simulation is used today across different physics domains. So for example, on the top left here, you're looking at an example of testing of a coronary stent. You're looking at the real test animation on the left and the virtual or simulation on the right, and you can see how well they correspond with each other, which again gives our users confidence that simulation can indeed replace or at least reduce their reliance on physical testing. Here on the top center, they're looking at fluid structure interaction in a drug delivery device. In this case, it's a peristaltic pump, making sure that we can optimize the drug delivery process itself, the amount of energy that it takes, the deformation in the tubes, and so on to meet our requirements. Here on the top right, we're looking at a surgical robot application. And in this case, we're trying to make sure that the stresses in the robot are as expected or within tolerances while ensuring its full range of motion and also ensuring that we have the right controls to get the accurate motions that are required for these kinds of high precision applications. Moving down, then we can look at things more closer to the human body, again, going back to the patient experience. In this case, we are simulating the interaction between a very fine needle and human skin to make sure that we can deliver a drug as effectively as possible with minimal discomfort. Here in the bottom center, we are looking at an artificial aortic valve replacement device, and we are trying to look at when the device is in place, how does that affect the hemodynamics of the heart, for which we have to consider a beating human heart, which is part of the simulation. And finally, on the bottom right here, we're looking at a sensor application and looking at the electromagnetic interaction between that on-body sensor and the human body itself, which we'll look at in more detail today. Okay, so just to perhaps remind some of you why it is we're using virtual testing in place of physical testing. Physical testing, of course, fundamentally requires that something actually be built, right? You need to build a physical product, which takes time and money. In the virtual world, you don't have to do that. You simply create a model on a computer and start working with it. Physical testing can be very expensive and time-consuming. Neither of those constraints are true for virtual models, which could be really quick to run in minutes and hours. And again, we'll show you some examples of that today. More importantly, physical prototyping typically takes place quite late in the design process. And what that means is if you find something is wrong during your assessment, you might have to go back and make changes to your design, and that could be quite expensive. Whereas if you're doing it in the virtual world, you're getting your results back in minutes and hours, and making design changes is quite simple. Also important is when you do a physical test, you get a result, right? You learn whether your device has reacted as expected or not. So essentially, has it passed or failed the test? But you don't get much clarity on why it might have passed or failed. Whereas in the virtual world, using visualization techniques that you'll see today, you not only know what happened, but you get a very good sense of what the root causes that might have caused that result, which then allows you to take ameliorative actions or come up with more informed designs. What all of this means for our customers is that if you're using physical testing, it's quite likely that you're going to run out of time before you've had a chance to optimize your design for a specific application or for a specific range of applications. Whereas in the virtual world, that's a lot easier to achieve for all the reasons I just mentioned before. It's also worth remembering that there are some cases in which simulation allows validation of products and processes that you probably simply can't test in the real world. And this is especially true in electromagnetics, as you'll see, where it's often important to know the quantity of electromagnetic energy inside the human body, which is impossible to measure. Right? So simulation does provide some very compelling advantages to physical testing. Okay, so what are we going to look at today? We're going to primarily focus on two categories, which are, in our experience, the most important ones, the most widely used applications in electromagnetics today for medical devices. The first one, as I mentioned before, is connected devices, and there's a lot of these types of devices on the market today and expanding very rapidly, right? So these are cases like hearing aids, or for example, some kind of wearable, measurable, diagnostic or tracking device, all of which comes with electronic components, and we need to optimize the performance. Implants could be orthopedic implants or even pacemakers and so on, and you need to ensure that they're working safely from an electromagnetic standpoint. There's also other applications that are important, and we have very strong solutions for them. Things like MRI machines, microwave imaging, radio frequency ablation, proton therapy systems, and so on, for which electromagnetics is very, very relevant, and we do offer strong solutions. But today, our primary focus will be on the first two categories, connected devices and implant safety. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Nivedita, who will tell us a little bit more about what SIMULIA offers in this area.
Thanks, Carl. Hi, everyone. So I will start with a very brief overview on what constitutes electromagnetic simulation and what makes up our electromagnetic simulation portfolio. So as a quick reminder from earlier in the webinar, our simulation portfolio comprises multiple engineering disciplines. Electromagnetics in particular comes under the banner of our SIMULIA multi-physics portfolio. And if we zoom into the electromagnetics application itself, there's multiple areas that are being covered. So the pie chart that you see on your left, that gives us a brief glimpse into the different types of workflows that you can use with our flagship tools, the tools being CST Studio Suite and Opera. So what are the applications that we cover? There's a lot of them. And when we move on to the next slide, you can see that there's a lot of different animations, a lot of them, and they're giving you a sense of the wide range of different workflows that we cover. So that's everything from DC, low frequency, all the way up to RF, millimeter wave, and optical devices. Who are our users? They range from device manufacturers in high tech to transportation and mobility, given that electronics is the fastest growing market and innovation in the EV and vehicle industry, to aerospace and defense, and even energy processes and utilities. But our focus today is going to be on life sciences and healthcare. So we're looking at designing accurate, efficient, and safe devices for medical imaging, wearables, implants, and for diagnostic equipment. So on to why and how are these tools being used in the development of medical devices? As I previously mentioned, we have a very comprehensive set of electromagnetic solvers. So that's over 24 different solvers based on a variety of numerical methods. So that lets us cover everything from statics to high frequency, and we can even do coupled simulation, which means looking at system level components, adding circuit elements, and even adding multi-physics workflows. All of these are combined into a unified GUI in which we're able to set up, import external CAD if we need to, assign all of the complex material details and other simulation details that need to go into doing that workflow. And all of that is still being done in a single environment. So when you couple that with the high performance capabilities, that includes GPUs, distributed computing, and so on, and the ability to access the 3D experience platform. So we'll be covering more on that later, but we have what you call an end-to-end solution that will allow for rapid design and prototyping of medical devices. over to my colleague Abhishek, who will start by covering one of the key applications in detail.
So hi everybody, I'm going to walk you through a few common use cases that can be very easily simulated using our softwares that Nivedita just covered. So focusing on performance, regulation and safety. So what you see right now here is an image of an anechoic chamber. This is used for EMC tests, and any device that you launch into the market needs to be certified for the EMC standard. Unless and until you've certified, you cannot launch your device. And what is seen right now is that most of these devices, they do not meet the EMC requirements in the first attempt. And these tests are extremely expensive and they take a long time to actually go through these tests. So it increases your time to market as well as cost of the product. So what we have for this, and as also for the human safety compliance, we will see human safety is another regulation that needs to be met, because these devices, these wireless devices, emit radiations. Now, these radiations are not harmful as such. I mean, they do not cause cancer. They are non-ionizing radiations, but still they can cause discomfort, and for prolonged time, if you have these devices near, they can cause some physical problems. So to ensure that the exposure is within the limits, we have taken an example of a device called ISO. So ISO is basically, it's the name of the Greek goddess of healing. But here, this device is a combination product. So what it does is that it delivers drug into the veins of the patient directly. It is IoT enabled. So it has antenna, it has a PCB, a battery, and also in order to ensure that this drug gets delivered properly in the right amount, there is a stepper motor in it. So these are the two main aspects that need to be considered for electromagnetic simulation, and that's what we will do in the following slides. And to give you an overview, these are some of the workflows that we will take a look at in this device. So as I said before, it has the stepper motor, it has antennas, PCBs. So let's go through the first workflow for this. So the first one is antenna design and placement. We have a tool called Antenna Magus, which is a very comprehensive list of antennas designed for various applications. So you can just search for your requirement. Let's say you want an antenna for Bluetooth or an antenna for, let's say, a naval chip. Whatever your specifications are, you can just enter them into the search bar. You can get a list of antennas that are suitable for your device. And you can even filter them out based on the constraints of your device. What are the dimensions of your device? And then you can just select your antenna and play with its dimensions, change its frequency, its bandwidth, and you can very easily get an off-the-shelf antenna. So once you have your antenna ready, the next step is to place it into your device. So now these devices can be very small, and therefore the area that you have, or the volume that you have where you can place them, is extremely less. And what we do is that many of these antennas and these devices are built using CAD tools such as SolidWorks, Creo, or NX. All of these CAD tools are very well integrated with the 3D experience platform that is the main product of Dassault Systems, which integrates the CAD and the simulation softwares. So what we do here now is, to begin with, we import the antenna. And the first step is to obviously define the materials. So for that, we have a huge list of materials already defined in CST with all its electromagnetic properties as well as its thermal and structural properties, in case you want to do a coupled simulation with the thermal solvers available in CST or even the structural solvers. So the first step is to define those materials. Then we define the mesh groups. So certain parts you want to mesh them finely because they are very critical, and certain other parts you can mesh them very coarsely. So this helps save your computational time. The next step would be to define the other parts, such as, let's say you have the frequency, for what frequency range you want to uh, basically analyze the simulation. Then once you run the simulation, you can run it on the cloud, by the way, using high performance computing. You can observe the lightweight results on the cloud, so you don't need to open your laptop, and you can, your CST Studio software. You observe what is the frequency. In this case, Carl, if you just go back to that portion where we showed the result. So here we see that the results are not meeting the criteria. This is a Bluetooth antenna, and it is supposed to radiate at 2.4 gigahertz. But this one seems to be radiating at around 2.8 gigahertz. And even the return loss is not low enough. So now what we do is we perform a design change. We go back to SolidWorks or any of your CAD tools. We change the dimensions of the antenna, and we just hit check for update, CAD update, and the entire simulation scenario gets updated automatically in CST. So that's a very good advantage of CST, is that you don't need to redesign or redo the entire scenario. So here, after resimulating the device, you observe the S parameters. Can you just go back, Carl, to the comparison of the 1D plots? So here you see that now on the right side, the S parameters are looking pretty good. They are at 2.4 gigahertz and with the required amount of return loss. Then you can even see the directivity plots, whether they are omnidirectional or not. You can see the electric fields. So all such things can be very easily seen in CST. Now, once you've designed the antenna, this is just, from a performance point of view, but from a safety point of view, since, as I mentioned before, any device that has wireless components in it is going to emit some kind of exposure. And when such devices are very close to the human tissue, they can cause a risk. So now what we do is that we see how it's going to affect the human tissue. So for that, we have in CST a very nice tool called the Bio Human Library. So what this does is that it allows you to download or basically load these predefined human models. You can either import the entire model or a portion of it. Nivedita will cover this in detail later on. So in this case, it's a hand model. And what we do here is that we place the device on it, and we try to see what is the exposure that is absorbed into this human tissue. So in this case, you can see that the SAR rating mentioned over there is about 4.2 watt per kg. So that's too high. The limit specified by the FDA standard is 1.6 watt per kg, which means this can pose a threat. So what we do is that we insert this absorber. This is an RF absorber which absorbs a lot of your RF energy or radio frequency energy, and then you see what is the performance. So now what you see is that the 1D plot. This is the return loss for the antenna, and it seems to have shifted from its frequency, which means that after adding the absorber, the antenna performance has gone down. So we are trying to meet one KPI, but the other KPI is affected. So now what we do is that we go back to CST in the schematic, we define a matching circuit. So this helps bring our antenna to the right frequency once again. So we add some lumped elements which are automatically calculated. And now we see the return loss is exactly the way we wanted it. It's at 2.4 gigahertz. And yeah, and then we redo this. And what we find out is that now the SAR rating, if you look at the SAR value, you'll see that it's now within the limit. So it's basically 1.45. It's not probably visible here, but it's less than 1.6 watt per kg. So what we saw is that many a times you have multiple KPIs to be met. So in this case, you meet one KPI and you go back, you fail at one of the other KPIs. So you can do these kinds of studies very easily in CST. Next is EMC compliance. So over here, again, you see the anechoic chamber, which is used for this. You have a receiving antenna, which observes the emissions, and you rotate the device while you do this. This takes typically days together, sometimes weeks, because there are multiple components, multiple parts of your device that need to be analyzed. The solution for this in CST is that we can define multiple probes at a distance of, let's say, 3 meters, because that's what the standard specifies, and then analyze at a time what is the field at all of these probes. So you don't have to rotate any of your antennas. And this makes it very easy. You don't need to design the entire chamber also, because the purpose of the chamber is to act as a completely absorbing boundary. You don't want any reflections. In CST, you do that by default. You have completely absorbing boundaries, and you can analyze this. So now the next one is, I guess, yeah, the results for radiate emissions. So here, what we saw is that the stepper motor that I talked about before is acting as a source of these emissions. So even though the stepper motor is working at very low frequencies, it's like in kilohertz range, but still, sometimes the coils inside these stepper motors, they have some kind of parasitic capacitance with respect to the casing. And this capacitance will cause some spikes in your emissions. So in this case, the spike is visible at 350 megahertz. So the limit specifies that it needs to be less than 40 dB volts per meter. Sorry, dB microvolts per meter. So what we do is that we introduce a choke, which is basically an inductor, and it acts as a low pass filter, thus reducing your emissions at the higher frequencies. And what you see right now is a comparison. So before the choke and after the choke, the emissions, how they look. So this is something that you can do very easily in CST. Next is your radiated susceptibility. So just this is complementary to the previous solution that I just described. Instead of seeing how your device is emitting these radiations, we want to see if there are radiations externally due to some other devices. Does your device get affected by all that? So for that, the general way to do it is either using an anechoic chamber or using a reverberation chamber that you see on the left, where instead of having completely absorbing boundaries, we have completely reflecting boundaries. So you have a source of these emissions, and what you do is that you you basically have these reflecting walls, which will direct all of those waves in every direction. So you have an environment which is statistically uniform. We can model the exact same thing in CST using CAD tools, but we have an even better solution. So instead of modeling the entire chamber, why not just model those waves? So what we did here is that we modeled 200 to 300 plane waves, which were scattered all around in the entire volume to mimic what would happen in an actual chamber. So there are no walls, there are just plane waves, and you get the same behavior. You get the same statistically uniform field, which is required for these radiate susceptibility tests. And we also compared them with an analytical solution. So you can see the results on the left are the results for analytical solution, the standard deviation within the chamber. And on the right, you see the results for the actual simulation. So you just have to place your device into this field source that you see on the right, and you can get your radiate susceptibility results very easily. So these are some things that we can do within CST with these tools, which make your life very easy. Next, this is the electrostatic discharge example. So even though you see a phone over here, we are actually going to, we can actually do this on any kinds of device. So you have an ESD gun, which impinges a very high voltage signal into your traces. And what this does is that it tries to see whether this signal is going to reach the very sensitive areas, that is your processors within your device. So on the left, you see that there is no protection. So the device is actually affected by this signal. And on the right, you see that after installing a protection diode, all of that current is actually drained into the ground. Likewise, for signal integrity, we can actually see how, yeah. So this is how you can see the results. And with the protection, you can see the currents are much lower. So this is something that we can test for many of these devices. Signal integrity is a performance-related KPI that needs to be met. You have crosstalk, you have return loss, you have these reflections. You wish to see eye diagrams. All of these things can be seen very easily with these CST tools. You have 3D full wave solvers, as well as you have the PCB 2D solvers. So you can actually see the accurate results in the for the electric fields, as well as you can get quick results if you're only interested in seeing what are those 1D values for the return loss. So many of these things can be actually seen. Next, you can, apart from electromagnetics, these are some of the other workflows that we try to see. So you have drop test. We try to see, when your device drops, how does it affect the structural integrity of the device? And also you make the device completely, but once you actually manufacture it, sometimes it's difficult to, have the plastic injection. So you can even simulate those kinds of things to understand whether your device is manufacturable or not. So these are some of the things that you can look at. Next, I would hand over the control to Nivedita, who will take you through medical the implants, MRI implants. Over to you, Nivedita.
Thanks, Abhishek. So now we'll take a deep dive into medical implants and how we can ensure their safety and functionality. At Simulia, we have decades of experience working with multiphysics workflows for implant safety and reliability. And that can include everything from construction of the CAD file to model preparation, fluid analysis, structural analysis, electromagnetic analysis, all the way up to 3D printing. Obviously, the focus of our webinar today is going to be on electromagnetic analysis. And we'll begin by taking a look at an example of an MRI machine. So when it comes to med devices, the main keyword is safety. So, and this isn't just a nice to have, it's a regulatory requirement with very strict limits on how it can be used with humans. And this isn't exclusive to implants. So, with the picture of the MRI machine that you see here, being able to certify the safety using specific absorption rates and other KPIs, that's an integral part of the development process. But of course, it can become more complicated with an implant. We cannot launch the product unless and until we actually have the compliance ready. And we're not dealing with just a patient setting, but we're needing to take into account additional electronics too. And often this falls on the medical equipment manufacturer, not on the MRI device manufacturer. So this is an example of typical implants that can come up when we're talking about MRI safety: cardiovascular, orthopedic, cranial, even diagnostic equipment that can be either worn or inserted into the body for the duration of the imaging. And these are governed by very strict FDA guidelines. So it's a standard test method for measuring how RF-induced heating on passive implants can take place while we're looking at MRI imaging. So essentially the temperature rise that's associated with the RF power deposition during an MRI procedure. So we're not just modeling the implant safety here, but we can look at a lot of different aspects of MRI design, including the MRI coil, looking at the field distribution, being able to look at the component level setting of an MRI chamber, and so on. We're not going to be focusing on that today. We're going to be only talking about implant safety. So why is it so important to simulate? When we're talking about virtual MRI safety simulation with CST Studio Suite, It not only reduces the need for real-world testing, but it also provides performance enhancements that dramatically decrease the turnaround time. So you can see the three different comparisons here. We're starting with a real-world ASTM Phantom. When we're talking about a biophantom, it's essentially just a cylindrical vessel that is filled with what we call a tissue simulating liquid. That is a liquid that mimics the dielectric properties of a human tissue under specific frequency and testing conditions. And it's a very common test standard that is accepted by the FDA in order to look at safety and compliance. So on the left here, you're looking at a real world ASTM Phantom inside of an MRI scanner. You can imagine in order to build this Phantom, in order to obtain the tissue simulating liquid and place it and do all of the tests and measurements, it would take roughly up to a day. Compare that with the virtual model of an MRI safety. This is where we're looking at a full simulation. We're including the MRI birdcage coil. We're including all of the power sources that come with the MRI and the induced fields that are happening in the presence of a phantom. That is something that you can test in just less than an hour. Given that we have multiple numerical methods that can be used to enhance performance and dramatically decrease the turnaround time, that can be even lowered to, like, say, less than a minute. So on the right side, we're looking at a virtual model using what we called a field source transform simulation, and that's going to allow us to do it very quickly. So the takeaway from this is that it's nice to include all of the details, but we don't always have to. And in this case, we're able to tweak and make very important design decisions early on in the prototyping process by just using these simplifications. And of course, all of the virtual modeling that we're doing is still going to be significantly less than relying entirely on physical prototyping. So how do we qualify implant safety? Here's an example of an uninsulated wire placed inside of a biophantom, and we're looking at the associated temperature rise. So we're comparing CST simulations with the graph on the right. We're comparing the CST simulation result with a measurement validation, and you can see that there's excellent agreement between the two. So that tells us that simulation can and is being used as a very efficient predictor of what can be actually happening in the real world. If we go on to another analysis here, so this is an implant, an orthopedic hip implant, and we're looking at a validation of MR-induced heating. So we're looking at the blue box is showing us the actual simulated end temperature, and the gray box that you're looking at is a thermal imaging display of the same thing. And you can see that the hotspots are identical. So again, simulation, especially when we're talking about a very good simulation that's set up correctly and with all of the material and other considerations that are required, can be a very accurate predictor. So another example would be cardiovascular implants, and they're of particular importance here, mainly because of the level of detail that goes into them. If we take an example of a coronary stent, you can see that there's very minute geometric details that need to be captured, which means that in order to simulate them, we need to be able to mesh them, which is how we discretize simulation into parts that can be computationally solved, and then run the necessary analysis. And finally, the animation that you're seeing at the bottom is depicting the transient heating, which is taking place in a stent with respect to the time increase that is happening. So, so far, all of the implant safety content that we saw was being done with a phantom, but that's obviously not what a human body looks like. And in order for us to have increased confidence in our simulation, we need to be able to simulate something that is a more anthropomorphic representation of the human body. And this is where voxel models come into the picture. What you're seeing here is a comparison of a voxelized human body model, and it has all of the details, including organs and blood flow and so on. And we're looking at what the MRI-induced heating looks like when we're looking at a patient without an implant versus a patient that is wearing or has an hip implant. And you can see the temperature distribution. And what's curious here is that the temperature distribution is actually the maximum temperature, or the hotspot is not on the implant itself, which is where you might expect it to be. And this is because of the fact that when we take into effect blood flow, it's a transient process. It affects how heat distribution takes place in the body. And that means that hotspots can occur in places that is not in the direct vicinity of the implant. That's something that we can see very easily with simulation, which may not be as easy to measure when we're only looking at it in a virtual, in a physical lab setting. So that means we need to have very efficient anthropomorphic models. So at CST, we have a very wide range. As you can see, there's different BMIs. They can even be posable and even take into account things like the breathing sequence. An example of why we would use that would be, say, a pacemaker that might be detuned by a breathing movement. And if you want to take that into account, you need to be able to efficiently simulate that. So for all of these models, they include temperature-dependent electric and magnetic properties. They are, using the same material properties that are approved by the FDA, and they have a very high level of anatomical detail. So it can really be used as a stand-in for representing real-world scenarios. Going back to our MRI implant safety. So let's look at an example of where we take a hip implant. We have a solid implant and a lattice implant as well. And we're going to choose one of the biomodels. Her name's Rosalind. And we're going to be looking at simulating the full biomodel and also with the implant, but also looking at it in an MRI safety simulation scenario using the field source method that we talked about earlier. And while running this in a full wave solver, we're going to end up with everything that can be used to quantify the RF effects of the human body when it's interacting with the MRI fields, and also what is happening in a more parasitic way, where we're looking at a passive implant that is not powered in any way, but because of the externally induced RF fields, we know that we can expect to see some hotspots and other things that could be potentially dangerous to the patient. So that we're showing using an electric field distribution. So what you're seeing on the left here is a 3D field distribution and the corresponding SAR values. So SAR is specific absorption rate. It is the key KPI that is used in order to quantify safety for implants and wearables. And so here we can see that, again, not only are we able to see a dynamic electric field distribution, but we're also able to see where the maximum RF power is being absorbed. And again, you can see that the hotspots are not necessarily constrained only to the area around the implant, but it can move to other areas as well. And these are important considerations that we need to take into place. Some others could also be just looking at different material properties. So we looked at how it can vary with respect to steel versus titanium. So that's about active implants. That's about passive implants, sorry. Now we're moving on to active implants. Everything that we talked about so far, whether that's MRI safety or even connected devices where we're looking at things like electromagnetic interference and so on, all of those apply to active implants. But there's an added layer of complexity here because now we're talking about devices that also are powered separately. So they have their own electronics, and we want to make sure that these electronics are not interacting in a negative way or affecting a patient's safety when they come into contact with, say, an MRI machine or an X-ray scanner or even, say, standing next to or close to an antenna base station tower. So with active implants, there's the considerations that we're talking about. It can have a greater effect both in its interaction with the human body and with the external devices itself. So in the next slide, we can actually see what happens when we include implant electronics and leads into the hip implant that we were previously looking at, where it was previously just a passive implant. Now we're looking at what happens if there are fields that are being generated by the implant itself and how they're going to be affected when exposed to an MRI radiation. And again, you can see that there's a very clear representation of the current distribution here. So this is really what makes simulations, set simulation apart from measurement. With measurement, we might be able to get a pass-fail result, but with simulation, we're actually able to make the invisible visible because we're actually looking at what is happening with the RF current that is flowing through the implant and when it's placed inside of the body. Now, the very last thing that I want to mention here is the 3D experience platform. We talked about how all of the Simulia tools that can be used for different simulation aspects, whether that's electromagnetics or thermal or structural or fluids, all of them can be directly accessed from the 3D experience platform. What you're seeing here is a web-based application that allows you to just drag and drop and apply different simulation methods or different simulation analysis and workflows and have all of the results available to you in the browser itself. So everything that's happening here is in real time, meaning that you don't necessarily have to be an electromagnetics engineer in order to run this simulation, because of the fact that all of the models are available to you in real time with live CAD version tracking. You can just drag and drop and be able to look at the analysis that you want to see, whether that's looking at durability, whether that's looking at implant safety, or even looking at other things like electromagnetic effects, with how that changes with field strength, how that changes when we make different changes to, say, the MRI coil itself. So democratization of the simulation is something that can be done with a 3D experience platform. And just as important as what you're seeing here is what you're not seeing. There's no Excel sheets, PowerPoints, no email exchanges where we're sending data back and forth. Everybody that is a stakeholder in the product development process is able to get real-time information on the product and be able to work on the latest version of that. And that's what sets the 3D experience platform apart and makes it unique. And of course, as you can see, we're able to connect different aspects of our electromagnetic simulation that we saw into the platform and be able to look at the field results from there. And that actually brings us to the close of our of the technical part of our webinar. I think I will just hand it over to Carl now to close it.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Abhishek and Nivedita. In the interest of time, I'm going to just come up to the end. There's a few customer examples, but we don't have much time, so I just want to bring it to a quick closure so we can take at least a few questions. So again, hopefully through the webinar, you've been able to understand what some of these benefits are. But just to reiterate, the primary benefits with electromagnetic simulation are obviously reduced reliance on testing, which hopefully you've been convinced can be done. What that brings you then, of course, is faster turnaround times. And quite importantly, for this class of applications, the ability to achieve your compliance targets much easier and much faster with much less expertise. You've also seen what we can do on the 3D experience platform in terms of automating all of the simulation work that needs to be done using common models, as you saw with the unified modeling and simulation or ModSim approach. And we also took a quick look at what you can do beyond just electromagnetics, because at the end of the day, your requirements span multiple different physical domains. For more information on anything related to electromagnetics itself, you can go to our website, and it talks about various different applications, some of which we covered, some of which we did not, like the low frequency applications, charged particle dynamics, and so on, which are also relevant, especially in imaging. And you can also take a broader look at the other types of physics that Simulia offers, again, to get a broader image, a broader picture of what we provide relevant to you. I would strongly encourage you to attend a webinar we are presenting in a couple of weeks' time, which is really all about compliance. And in this case, it's about the ASME VNV 40 medical device compliance standard, for which we have a really nice offer that will be launched soon. So for those of you who are more interested in compliance aspect and establishing the credibility of simulation as a way to provide evidence to the regulatory authorities, I'd strongly encourage you to attend this webinar. In terms of next steps, there's a couple of things that can be done. Of course, if you're interested in obtaining the software, we can help you with that in whatever form would make sense for you, either standalone or on the 3D experience platform, on-premise or on cloud. We have a lot of simplified licensing models that could be relevant, so please talk to us about that. Sometimes you might be in a situation where you'd like to use simulation, but you're not quite sure how it would address your specific situation. And we really have expertise in helping you do that, as I'm sure you heard from my colleagues today. And finally, we can also deliver a kind of turnkey out-of-the-box solution for you for a specific application, similar to what we just showed you today with the hip implant MRI safety, where we do the simulations. We create the virtual twins based on your geometry. We can maintain and run these virtual twins as required by you. And so all you essentially what you would get is the benefits of simulation without necessarily investing in learning the software, investing in IT resources, and so on. We can take care of all of that for you. And really, that's kind of what we're seeing a lot of these days in newcomers to simulation who want value from day one. Okay, and with that, I would like to thank my colleagues here and encourage you to reach out to us, any of us, if you have more questions on any of these topics. With that, I will turn it back to Nicole, and thank you again very much for your time and attention.
All right, thank you so much for a wonderful webinar. Thank you to all of you who joined us live today. Really appreciate your time. Thank you to Dassault Systems for all of your expertise and for sponsoring today's webinar. I do encourage you to go to massmedic.com/events and check out all the other great events we have coming up. And we'll see you next time. Have a great day.